Early January 1945, Dwight Eisenhower faced a storm no map could reveal, a crisis no battlefield could prepare him for. From the moment he awoke in the Supreme Headquarters, in the chill of a European winter, the weight of command pressed on him like the snow-laden roofs of Normandy towns he had once fought to liberate. The alliance he had built with painstaking care, an intricate web of egos, pride, and political necessity, was unraveling faster than he could patch it. At the center of this unfolding storm stood Bernard Montgomery, the British Field Marshal whose ambition, like an unchained river, threatened to flood the delicate balance between American operational freedom and British strategic influence. Montgomery's recent press conference had ignited a blaze that swept through the American command like wildfire. He had publicly claimed credit for stopping the German advance during the Battle of the Bulge, suggesting that American forces had faltered and only British genius had salvaged the day. For Eisenhower, this was more than a personal affront. It was a strike at the very core of American honor, at the morale of the men who had endured the Ardennes, merciless forests, the bitter cold, and the relentless German attacks. Over 19,000 Americans had never left those woods alive, and now their sacrifice was being reframed by Montgomery as if their courage had been irrelevant. Newspapers erupted. Veteran organizations demanded answers, and, most critically, General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group, declared he would resign rather than continue serving under a command structure that permitted such public disparagement. Eisenhower felt the tension in every fiber of his body. He was caught in a no-man's land between the volcanic fury of his American generals and the stiff pride of a British officer who believed the war had proven his indispensable brilliance. He could not fire Montgomery without endangering the alliance. He could not accede to Montgomery's growing demands without fracturing his own command. He needed a solution that would satisfy no one, yet might keep the war effort intact. After hours of deliberation and sleepless nights, he devised a compromise. Montgomery could command one American army temporarily for the Rhine crossing, but that was all. No permanent authority, no broader strategic control, one army for a single operation. Montgomery would face the choice: accept humiliation or risk losing both armies entirely. Eisenhower waited, knowing the moment could define the cohesion of the Allied command for the rest of the war. On January 7, 1945, Montgomery addressed reporters with a demeanor polished yet dangerously arrogant. He claimed to have saved the Americans during the Battle of the Bulge, describing how he had discovered their forces in disarray and personally organized the defense that halted the German offensive. His narrative painted American generals as panicked and indecisive, while British leadership emerged as the saviors of a collapsing front. The reaction in the United States was immediate and explosive. Newspapers accused Montgomery of stealing credit for victories that had been earned by American blood. Veterans organizations demanded accountability. And most dangerously, General Bradley reaffirmed to Eisenhower that he would resign if the situation was not rectified. The insults were not abstract. They cut into the very morale of the soldiers who had endured the Ardennes winter. To them, Montgomery's words were a second assault, an affront from their allies that diminished the sacrifices of tens of thousands of men who had fought and died. Montgomery's own chief of staff, Major General Freddie Dining, flew to Eisenhower's headquarters with urgent news. Relief orders had already been drafted. Montgomery was mere hours away from dismissal. Dining returned to Montgomery and compelled him to issue an apology. Montgomery complied on January 8th, not out of genuine contrition, but because his subordinate warned that his career could end if he resisted. The apology spared him from dismissal, but did nothing to restore trust among American commanders. 2 days later, Montgomery was ready to escalate the crisis. During the Battle of the Bulge, Eisenhower had temporarily placed two American armies under Montgomery's command: the U.S. First Army under General Courtney Hodes and the U.S. Ninth Army under General William Simpson. Together, these forces totaled more than 500,000 men. The arrangement had been temporary, a practical response to the German offensive that had split the American front. Montgomery's headquarters were closer to the northern sector, allowing more effective coordination until the immediate threat passed. But Montgomery, seeing opportunity and temporary necessity, sought to make this arrangement permanent. His British and Canadian forces, worn down after 5 years of continuous combat, were insufficient for his ambitious northern thrust into Germany. The Ninth Army, a force of 300,000 Americans, became for Montgomery both a security blanket and a symbol of power. For the Americans under Simpson, it felt less like cooperation and more like captivity under a commander who distrusted their methods. Within days, Montgomery presented his case formally to Eisenhower at Supreme Headquarters. He demanded control over both the First and Ninth Armies, insisting that this was essential for a concentrated northern offensive aimed at the Ruhr industrial region. Montgomery argued that the broad front strategy squandered resources, that Southern American advances were slow, and that only a unified northern thrust under his command could secure victory by May. British forces were exhausted, Canadian troops were understrength, and American manpower was critical. Removing these armies, he insisted, would doom the northern operation. Eisenhower listened quietly, taking in every word, his face a mask of calm determination. When Montgomery concluded, Eisenhower's reply was stark and deliberate. The temporary command arrangement was just that, temporary. The armies would return to American control. Montgomery's expression went cold. His plans, his grand vision for a northern thrust, were being curtailed by political necessity. Eisenhower had made a military decision to maintain alliance cohesion, fully aware that it might appear operationally flawed. Bradley had already drawn a line in the sand. He would not tolerate Montgomery holding American armies indefinitely. The generals who had fought through Normandy supported Bradley's stance. Eisenhower now faced an impossible choice: keep Montgomery satisfied and risk losing American loyalty, or preserve his American commander's allegiance and risk British resentment. Both outcomes threatened the alliance. George Patton, hearing of Montgomery's demands, aligned with Bradley. Patton's Third Army had saved Bastogne during the Bulge, executing a daring maneuver that had turned the tide in the south. His troops had endured blizzards and blood-soaked forests to accomplish what Montgomery claimed credit for in the north. For Patton, this was about principle. He refused to let American blood be spent for the glory of a British ego. Threatening resignation alongside Bradley, he forced Eisenhower to confront the true stakes. A fractured command could unravel the entire Western effort. Churchill, aware of the unfolding crisis, intervened with a suggestion. Montgomery could retain the Ninth Army for the Rhine crossing, while the First Army returned to Bradley. This compromise would maintain British influence, while restoring American control over most forces. Eisenhower accepted. Bradley regained command of the First Army, and Montgomery retained temporary control of the Ninth. But Eisenhower knew words on paper would not suffice. He had to confront Montgomery directly. He informed him that the First Army would immediately return to Bradley, and the Ninth Army could be used only for Operation Plunder. Once the operation concluded, the Ninth would revert to American command. Montgomery protested, insisting that long-term planning required certainty and force structure. But Eisenhower's decision was final. One army, one operation, no extensions. Montgomery understood the terms: accept them or lose both armies. He accepted. On January 17, 1945, The First Army officially returned to Bradley's 12th Army Group. Hodes reported directly to Bradley, restoring pre-Bulge command structures. Montgomery's authority over American forces was reduced to a single operation. The precedent was clear. American armies would be commanded by Americans. Yet Bradley remained cautious. He worried Montgomery might exploit the Rhine operation to extend his command indefinitely. Eisenhower assured him the decision was binding and non-negotiable. Montgomery spent February and March planning Operation Plunder. This would be the largest river crossing of the war. Over 300,000 Allied troops would assault the Rhine under massive artillery bombardment. Airborne divisions would seize key positions behind German lines. Engineers would construct bridges under fire. 9th Army was designated as the southern prong, while British and Canadian forces attacked from the north. Simpson's officers respected Montgomery's meticulous planning, yet grew concerned as his staff discussed operations beyond the Rhine, as if 9th Army would remain permanently under British control. The Americans were wary, knowing that political compromise could be stretched to operational limits. On March 22, 1945, Patton's Third Army reached the Rhine near Oppenheim. Recognizing a weakly defended section, Patton acted without delay. Within hours, elements of Third Army crossed the river. Patton immediately informed Bradley, demanding recognition. The world needed to know that American troops had crossed first. This was not mere boastfulness. It was a demonstration of American mobile warfare doctrine at its finest. Rapid exploitation, initiative, and adaptation had achieved what meticulous planning often sought, but sometimes failed to accomplish. Montgomery, incensed, called it reckless. The Rhine, he insisted, required careful preparation, yet Patton's success proved otherwise. Operation Plunder commenced on March 23rd. Allied forces, over 300,000 strong, assaulted the Rhine. 9th Army advanced from the south, British and Canadian units from the north. Airborne divisions seized critical objectives. Engineers built bridges under fire, and artillery blasted German positions. Despite determined resistance, the operation succeeded, establishing a substantial bridgehead. Montgomery hailed it as a complete success. Yet newspapers highlighted Patton's earlier crossing, demonstrating the contrast between American initiative and British methodicalness. 9th Army performed admirably, yet the operation underscored the Americans' capacity to fight independently. After the crossing, Montgomery attempted to extend his control over 9th Army, arguing operational necessity. Eisenhower and Bradley, however, enforced the original terms. On April 4, 1945, 9th Army officially returned to American command. Montgomery retained only British and Canadian forces. Churchill did not intervene. Britain's influence had waned since D-Day, and further political entanglement was unnecessary. The temporary compromise had ended. American forces would finish the war under American command and doctrine. Montgomery's grand vision of a northern thrust to Berlin had died, not at German hands, but under the weight of his own ambition and the necessity of alliance cohesion. Following the successful Rhine crossing, the tension between British and American command persisted like a slow-burning fuse. Montgomery, though formally reduced to commanding only British and Canadian forces, could not conceal his frustration. Every planning session, every operational order, carried the subtle marks of his lingering ambition. He insisted on meticulous coordination, not just for the success of Operation Plunder, but for the campaigns that, in his mind, lay beyond the river. His staff spoke openly of advancing 9th Army into northern Germany, a move that implicitly challenged Eisenhower's command decisions. American officers noticed these discussions and understood the implications. Montgomery was testing the limits of the compromise, probing to see whether political caution would allow him to extend his command. Meanwhile, Bradley and Simpson moved decisively to reassert American authority. Ninth Army, having played a critical role in the Rhine assault, was now back under American control. But its leadership faced a delicate task. They had to maintain operational momentum while preventing any perception that their achievements were contingent on British approval. For Simpson, the experience was both vindicating and frustrating. The troops under his command had fought with professionalism and courage, yet for weeks their efforts had been portrayed as secondary to Montgomery's leadership. Now, with control returned, Simpson sought to demonstrate that American armies were not only capable of executing complex operations, but also of exploiting opportunities with speed and initiative. The months of March and April 1945 saw an accelerated push into Germany. Patton's Third Army, moving with the characteristic audacity and mobility that defined his command, advanced eastward with unmatched speed. Patton's forces seized towns, bridges, and vital transportation nodes, often outpacing the slower, methodical movements of Montgomery's formations. While British and Canadian troops focused on secure, set-piece operations, Patton demonstrated the power of flexible tactics, improvisation, and the bold exploitation of enemy weaknesses. His crossing of the Rhine had foreshadowed this approach, a single decisive act proving that initiative and courage could overcome even the most heavily defended positions. Simpson's Ninth Army, now firmly under Bradley, continued its role as a southern prong in the broader American advance. Their operations were carefully coordinated with Patton, ensuring that the northern thrust and the southern maneuvers complemented each other. Engineers repaired bridges, cleared mines, and prepared roads to facilitate rapid movement. Logistics officers worked tirelessly to keep fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies flowing, a Herculean task in the shattered German landscape. Every day, the contrast between American initiative and Montgomery's deliberate, methodical planning became clearer. While Montgomery's troops executed brilliantly within set-piece operations, American armies pushed boundaries, moving faster and striking with unexpected aggression. The political stakes remained high. Montgomery, while outwardly compliant, sought to influence strategic discussions, subtly suggesting that Ninth Army's continued involvement was necessary for the encirclement of German forces. Eisenhower and Bradley had anticipated these maneuvers and were prepared to enforce the terms of the compromise. Communication between American commanders was clear and deliberate. Any suggestion that Ninth Army might remain under British command was swiftly addressed. The message was simple. The temporary arrangement had ended. The Rhine crossing was complete, and Ninth Army's authority under British oversight was no longer valid. During this period, morale among American troops was high. Soldiers understood the significance of the Rhine crossing and subsequent advances, yet many were acutely aware of Montgomery's prior claims to credit. Letters from home, newspaper articles, and stories circulating among units reinforced a sense of pride in their achievements and a cautious skepticism of British accolades. The contrast between American and British command styles was evident not just in operations, but in the culture and communication of their forces. Americans emphasized initiative, speed, and adaptability. Montgomery's forces prioritized meticulous planning, thorough preparation, and rigid adherence to procedures. Both approaches had merit, but in this phase of the war, speed and adaptability increasingly proved decisive. By late April 1945, the American advance had linked up with Soviet forces at the Elbe River, completing a crucial coordination point in the Allied strategy. This junction symbolized not only the culmination of operational planning, but also the restoration of American authority over their forces. Ninth Army, having executed its objectives under Simpson, now operated within the larger American strategic framework, demonstrating the effectiveness of unified American command. Meanwhile, Montgomery's 21st Army Group continued advancing into northern Germany and the Netherlands, achieving significant successes in liberating populations and securing ports. Yet the operations were accomplished without American troops, highlighting the separation of responsibilities dictated by Eisenhower's compromise. Throughout these weeks, Montgomery continued to lobby subtly for increased operational influence. His staff proposed operations involving Ninth Army beyond what was necessary for the immediate campaign, suggesting that the Army's presence was critical for continued success. Eisenhower, however, maintained firm oversight, emphasizing that all actions had to respect the terms agreed upon in January. Bradley and Simpson coordinated closely with Eisenhower, ensuring that any attempt to extend Montgomery's control was neutralized quickly. This careful management prevented potential disruptions and preserved the integrity of American operational command. Patton's Third Army, meanwhile, provided a stark demonstration of American operational philosophy. Their rapid advances, opportunistic engagements, and aggressive exploitation of German weaknesses contrasted sharply with the more deliberate British approach. Soldiers and officers alike observed the tangible benefits of initiative-driven warfare, reinforcing confidence in American command methods. The successes of the Third Army also reinforced Eisenhower's strategic decision to maintain American control over their forces. The evidence was irrefutable. American commanders could operate effectively and decisively without British oversight. By early May 1945, the end of the European War was in sight. German resistance was crumbling under coordinated Allied pressure from both East and West. Ninth Army, advancing under Bradley, continued to secure critical objectives, linking up with Soviet forces and capturing strategic towns. Patton's Third Army exploited gaps in German defenses, seizing bridges and transportation hubs that facilitated the final collapse of resistance. Montgomery's forces, operating independently, achieved successes in the north, yet their progress was slower and less dynamic compared to American advances. The operational contrast between American initiative and British meticulousness had become undeniable. In this phase of the war, the lessons of coalition command were painfully evident. Trust, communication, and adherence to agreed-upon boundaries were essential to prevent internal conflicts from undermining the broader strategic objective. Montgomery's earlier press conference, his attempts to extend command over American armies, and his reliance on temporary operational necessity had highlighted the fragility of alliance cohesion. Eisenhower's careful balancing of personalities and politics ensured that American forces retained operational autonomy while preserving the alliance, an achievement that required both strategic foresight and political acumen. The final weeks of operations demonstrated that even when given opportunities to extend his influence, Montgomery could not match the speed and adaptability of American forces. Ninth Army's return to American command underscored the principle that temporary compromises, when exploited beyond their intended purpose, could threaten both military efficiency and alliance trust. Eisenhower's measured approach, balancing political necessity with operational prudence, had ensured that the Americans would finish the war on terms consistent with their capabilities, doctrines, and sacrifices. By mid-May 1945, as German forces surrendered across the Western Front, the outcomes of the Rhine crossing, the northern thrusts, and the American-led advances were clear. Eisenhower's decisions in January had shaped the operational framework for the final months of the war. Montgomery's ambitions, though constrained, demonstrated both the opportunities and dangers inherent in coalition warfare. The Americans had not only reclaimed operational authority, but had also validated their methods of mobile, flexible, and initiative-driven warfare. As May 1945 approached, The final collapse of German resistance made clear the consequences of Eisenhower's careful management. Ninth Army, under Bradley, pressed steadily into northern Germany, coordinating flawlessly with Patton's Third Army and advancing Allied forces from the south. Every town liberated, every bridge captured, and every surrender accepted demonstrated the effectiveness of American initiative, mobility, and operational flexibility. Montgomery's British and Canadian forces, advancing in parallel from the north, accomplished their objectives methodically, but the contrast with American operations was stark. The speed and decisiveness of American armies underscored that trust, autonomy, and operational freedom were essential in coalition warfare. Montgomery, despite his frustration, maintained the veneer of professional composure. Yet his ambitions for a massive northern thrust into Berlin had already been curtailed in January. The temporary command of Ninth Army during the Rhine crossing had been his final opportunity to exercise influence over American forces. He had tried to exploit operational necessity to extend control, but Eisenhower and Bradley had stood firm. The lesson was clear. Personal ambition could never override alliance integrity. Montgomery's vision, once grand, had been limited not by German resistance, but by his own inability to balance ego with coalition politics. On April 4, 1945, Ninth Army officially returned to American command. This formal transfer signaled the restoration of operational authority and reaffirmed the principle that American armies would be led by American commanders. Simpson and Bradley coordinated the final advances into Germany, linking up with Soviet forces at the Elbe and securing key strategic objectives. Patton's Third Army continued its rapid exploitation, seizing towns, bridges, and ports, demonstrating that initiative-driven warfare could achieve decisive results, even when faced with entrenched opposition. Montgomery's forces, now limited to Commonwealth troops, focused on liberating northern Dutch cities and securing German ports. The operation was a success, but devoid of the strategic influence Montgomery had sought. By May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Allies celebrated victory, but beneath the jubilation lay a deeper recognition of the lessons learned. Eisenhower's compromise had preserved the alliance, maintained American command integrity, and prevented a crisis that could have fractured the Western coalition. Montgomery's attempts to manipulate temporary operational arrangements for personal prestige had failed. American soldiers, who had fought and died in the Ardennes and beyond, saw their sacrifices honored and their leadership validated. The war in Europe had ended not simply because of battlefield prowess, but because of the careful navigation of personalities, politics, and command structures. In the end, Montgomery's vision of leading a great northern thrust into Berlin had died quietly. Not in the forests of Ardennes or the banks of the Rhine, but in a press room and the chambers of Supreme Headquarters. Eisenhower had given him enough rope to strangle his own ambitions, and Montgomery had used every inch. American armies would finish the war on American terms, under American command, and the trust required for coalition warfare had been restored. The story of the Rhine crossing, the temporary command of Ninth Army, and the delicate balance of Allied leadership became a lasting lesson. In coalition warfare, ego could be more dangerous than the enemy, and careful leadership was as critical as courage on the battlefield.